In the early dawn of June 18, 1815, the air above the rolling fields of Belgium hung heavy with mist and the scent of rain-soaked earth. The quiet countryside around the small village of Waterloo was about to witness one of the most decisive and dramatic confrontations in all of European history at the end of an empire, and the fall of a man who had once ruled the continent like a god among mortals. Napoleon Bonaparte, the Emperor of the French, stood on the edge of destiny, facing his final reckoning. Only 3 days earlier, his army had marched north from France into Belgium. Swift and determined, he sought to crush his enemies before they could unite against him. His plan was daring, brilliant, and very much like the man himself. The Seventh Coalition, a vast alliance of powers led by Britain, Prussia, and Austria, had risen to destroy him once and for all after his return from exile on the island of Elba. But Napoleon had no intention of surrendering his throne again without a fight. He believed his genius could still outmaneuver them all. By dawn, the French army, nearly 72,000 strong, stood ready. Across the muddy fields, 68,000 allied troops under the command of Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, waited in defensive positions along a gentle ridge south of the village of Montargis-Saint-Jean. Behind them lay Brussels, the gateway to the heart of Europe. If Wellington fell here, the road to victory would open once more for France. But if Napoleon lost, it would mean the end not only of his reign but of an entire era. The previous night, rain had fallen relentlessly. The fields were soaked and thick with mud. The ground that morning was still soft and treacherous, turning every step of a soldier or cannon horse into a struggle. Napoleon knew the importance of timing. His artillery, the finest in Europe, would be less effective in such conditions. So he waited for the ground to dry, delaying the attack until nearly midday. It was a decision that would haunt him forever. Wellington's army was a coalition of British, Dutch, Belgian, and German troops, many inexperienced but fiercely determined. His men were arranged behind the crest of the ridge, hidden from the French guns. Farmhouses like Hougoumont and La Haye-Sainte had been fortified, forming strong defensive anchors. Wellington was calm but cautious. He knew Napoleon's reputation as a man who could turn defeat into triumph with a single stroke of genius. Yet, he also knew something Napoleon didn't. The Prussian army, defeated 2 days earlier at Ligny, was regrouping and marching to join him. If Wellington could hold his ground long enough, the Prussians would arrive and the day would belong to the Allies. Around 11:30 a.m., as the clouds began to break and the sun pierced through the haze, the thunder of cannon shattered the stillness. The Battle of Waterloo had begun. Napoleon's artillery roared to life, firing hundreds of heavy iron balls toward the ridge. The sound was deafening, the ground shaking under the relentless bombardment. But the soggy soil absorbed much of the impact, blunting the deadly effect. The British infantry, lying flat behind the ridge, waited with grim patience as shells screamed overhead. Napoleon's first major assault came at Hougoumont, on the Allied right flank. It was meant to be a diversion, a way to draw Wellington's reserves away from the center. But what began as a feint soon turned into a brutal, all-consuming fight. Thousands of French soldiers stormed the walled farmhouse, only to be met with musket fire and bayonets from the British guards inside. The narrow courtyards and gardens became a slaughterhouse. Fire engulfed the buildings, smoke mixing with screams and gunfire. Yet, despite repeated assaults, Hougoumont did not fall. It became a symbol of resistance and a drain on Napoleon's strength. By early afternoon, the emperor turned his attention to the center. He ordered Marshal Ney, his fiery and fearless cavalry commander, to attack. Ney, known as the bravest of the brave, led columns of infantry across the muddy fields toward La Haye-Sainte, the farmhouse at the center of Wellington's line. The French advanced with bayonets gleaming and drums beating, but the British infantry waited, silent and disciplined. As the French neared, the order was given. A thunderous volley erupted, cutting down the first ranks like wheat before a scythe. The survivors pressed on, climbing over corpses and smoke, only to face another volley, then another. Still, they came on. For a moment, It seemed the French might break through. The fighting at La Haye-Sainte was desperate and close, muskets blazing from windows and walls. But the defenders at the King's German Legion held their ground, refusing to yield. He sent wave after wave, his courage undeniable, but the centre held firm. Napoleon watched through his telescope, frustration mounting. The day was slipping away, and the Prussians were coming. By now, black columns of Prussian troops could be seen in the distance, marching through the woods east of the battlefield. Napoleon had hoped that Marshal Grouchy, commanding 30,000 men, would intercept them. But Grouchy had failed. The Prussians, led by the relentless old General Gebhard von Blauenquarter, were closing in fast. Napoleon realized the danger but refused to retreat. He would crush Wellington before the Prussians arrived, day or die trying. At around 4 p.m., he believed he saw the enemy faltering. Through the smoke and chaos, he thought Wellington's lines were breaking. Without consulting Napoleon, he made a fateful decision. He ordered one of the most famous and disastrous cavalry charges in history. Thousands of French cuirassiers, resplendent in shining breastplates, thundered forward across the muddy plain, sabres raised high. It was a magnificent sight, a storm of steel and courage. But it was also madness. The British infantry, trained to perfection, formed squares, tight formations bristling with bayonets. The cavalry swept around them again and again, unable to break through the living walls of steel. Horses reared, men fell, and musket fire tore through the French ranks. Yet he would not stop. He led charge after charge, 5 in total, his face blackened with powder, his sword broken. The fields were littered with bodies and dying horses. Still, Wellington's line stood unbroken. By evening, the French army was exhausted. Napoleon's once mighty Grand Armée copyright he had thrown itself again and again against an immovable wall. Then came the final blow. The Prussians, arriving from the east, struck the French right flank at the village of Plancenoit. Fierce street fighting erupted as French troops tried desperately to hold them off. Napoleon sent in his last reserves, including his elite Imperial Guard, other proud veterans who had never known defeat. If anyone could turn the tide, it was them. As the sun began to set over Waterloo, Napoleon made his last gamble. Around 7:30 p.m., he ordered the Imperial Guard to attack the Allied center. The battlefield was shrouded in smoke and blood, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder. The Guard marched forward in perfect formation, drums beating slowly, their faces set like stone. "Vive l'Empereur!" they cried, advancing up the ridge toward Wellington's position. The British waited in silence, hidden behind the crest. When the Guard was within 50 yards, the order came up, "Guards," and at them. The ridge suddenly erupted with musket fire. The Guard staggered, wavered, but still pushed on. Another volley crashed out, and the mighty Imperial Guard, Napoleon's last hope, began to falter. For the first time in history, the Guard broke. Panic spread through the French ranks like wildfire. "La Garde recule." The Guard is retreating. The words were like a death knell. Discipline collapsed. Soldiers threw down their weapons and fled. Napoleon tried to rally them, shouting, pleading, but it was over. The field was lost. Around him, his empire crumbled once more. As darkness fell, the Prussians and British closed in from both sides. The roads were choked with fleeing men, cannons abandoned, horses dying in the mud. Napoleon barely escaped capture, protected by a handful of loyal officers. He rode away into the night, silent, defeated, his dreams shattered. The once great emperor, who had risen from obscurity to dominate Europe, was now a fugitive for the second time. The next morning, the battlefield of Waterloo was a vision of hell. Thousands of corpses lay scattered across the fields, their uniforms soaked in blood and mud. The cries of the wounded echoed through the smoke. Wellington, surveying the carnage, could only say, "It has been a damned near on thing." The cost of victory was immense. Over 50,000 men lay dead or wounded, French, British, Prussian alike. The green fields of Belgium had become a graveyard. Napoleon fled to Paris, hoping to rally political support, but it was useless. The French people were weary of war. The Chamber of Deputies refused to back him. On June 22, he abdicated the throne for the second and final time. 4 weeks later, he surrendered to the British, seeking asylum or perhaps mercy. Instead, they sent him far away, to the lonely island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic, a place from which there would be no escape. There, surrounded by the endless sea and a handful of loyal followers, Napoleon spent the remaining years of his life reflecting on his triumphs and his downfall. The Battle of Waterloo was more than a military defeat. It marked the end of an age, the age of revolution, of empire, of one man's towering ambition. It changed Europe forever. In the years that followed, peace returned, and monarchies restored their thrones. But the shadow of Napoleon never truly faded. His legend endured as the man who dreamed of reshaping the world, who rose higher than any before him, and who fell harder than any since. Even today, the name Waterloo carries the weight of finality, a symbol of ultimate defeat, of destiny fulfilled. For Napoleon Bonaparte, it was the moment when genius met its limit, when fate demanded its due. He had once said that a great man is like a cannonball fired with purpose, unstoppable until it meets its target. On that rainy day in June 1815, Napoleon's flight through history finally struck the unyielding wall of reality. And yet, as centuries pass, the story of Waterloo remains alive, not just as the end of a conqueror, but as the story of human ambition itself. The desire to rise, to command destiny, to reach beyond mortal limits, and the inevitable reckoning that follows. The mud, the smoke, the courage, the fear, all of it lingers in memory, echoing through time. Napoleon's fall reminds us that no empire, no matter how powerful, is eternal. The greatest victories carry within them the seeds of downfall. Perhaps, in the final silence after the cannons stopped, even Napoleon understood that. As he looked back on the fields of his last battle, he may have realized that his true enemy had never been Britain, nor Prussia, nor any coalition. It had been his own boundless ambition, the fire that lifted him to greatness, and the flame that finally consumed him. Waterloo was not just the end of Napoleon's empire. It was the end of an idea that one man could bend the world to his will. The dream had died in the mud of Belgium, beneath dark clouds and relentless rain. But in that death was also the birth of a legend, a story told and retold, not of defeat, but of the impossible heights to which human spirit can rise, even when it falls.